It is the year 1830. You are a woman, standing in the chilly morning sun of a town square in Yorkshire. The bumpy stones under your old shoes are slippery with ice, and your breathing makes little puffs of white air. You can hear soft talking getting stronger all around you, but it is not happy talk. It is something different entirely. It's a feeling that makes your tummy hurt, with a strange blend of scary feelings and a tiny wish. Around your neck, you can feel the scratchy rope, a lead just like the ones for farm animals. Your husband's rough, hard hand holds the other end. His voice travels over the square with the sure sound of a man selling his best cow. "What will you give for this good woman?" he shouts. His words are a little fuzzy from the beer he had at sunrise to make him feel calm. Strong back, good teeth can cook and fix things. The people gather near, their faces showing a mix of wonder, dislike, and thinking. Some men come up to look at you, like they might check a horse for sale, looking at your hands for hard spots that show you work hard, and seeing your face to decide if you are pretty enough to share their bed. You just stand there, your heart beating fast, knowing that very soon your whole life is going to change. You could be with a nicer man than the one who took you here, or you might be in a place that is even worse. But this is the thing that scares you most. This is not against the law. This is not a crime done in a secret place or a crazy thing to do. This, in the strange thinking of these days, is your best hope to be free, your only way to split up. Before we look into these lost tales of staying alive and hurting, if you like finding out about the secret facts of the past, think about pressing that like button and joining for more things like this one. And please write down below to tell me where you are hearing this from. I think it is amazing that we are looking at these old tales together from far away places in the world, joined through time and distance by our wanting to know about what happened long ago. The thing we call wife selling did not come just from meanness, but meanness was surely a piece of it. It grew out of a set of laws so strict and tough that it gave poor people no other choices. To know why many hundreds of men from that time took their wives to town squares with ropes around their necks, we must go into a time when women were not seen as people. They were things you could own. In that old England, the rule of being covered meant that when a woman got married, her own self went away. As the very famous law expert, Sir William Blackstone, said in 1753, the actual life or lawful being of the woman is put on hold during the marriage, or at least it is joined and mixed in with the life of her husband. She turned into what the law named a femme covert, a covered woman, hidden under her husband's lawful self, like she had on a magic cloak. Imagine Mary Thompson, a made-up but normal working lady of the 1820s. Before she was married, she could own things, sign papers, and even take someone to a judge. But as soon as she said her wedding words, it all changed. Her money from work belonged to her husband. Any gift of money from her mom and dad became his. If she began a little shop, selling bread or doing laundry, every single coin she made was, by law, his to own. Even her clothes, the real dress on her back, was his. If Mary's husband, we can name him William, chose to hit her until she could not stand up, the law gave small help. A man had the power to fix his wife's ways, just as he could teach a child or a dog. If he spent their house money on drinks or played games with their food money, she had no lawful way to stop him. If he came home with sickness from bad places or said no to working while she did washing till her fingers hurt, the law saw this as his right as the house boss. But what would happen when Mary could not stand it any longer? What happened when William's fixing left her with cracked ribs, or when his drinking meant their little ones went to bed with empty tummies every night? What would happen when she found someone new, maybe a nice man whose wife had died, who was kind to her with goodness, or a single man who showed her real love? For the rich people, there was a way to end a marriage, but it was so costly and hard, it was almost just for kings and queens. Before the year 1857, to end a marriage, you needed a special new law from the government, a thing that cost at least £1,000, which would be like £118,000 today. That amount was more cash than most working families would ever get in their whole life. Even after the Marriage Problems Act of 1857 made ending a marriage a bit easier through the courts, it still cost about £40, more than a worker's pay for a whole year. For the poor, there were really just 5 ways to leave a marriage. You could part ways by agreeing to, but this meant both people could not marry someone else by law. You could run away, just vanish one day, and wish your partner did not come to find you. You could try to get a lawful split through the church courts for reasons of cheating or cruelty that could kill you, but this cost a lot of money and did not let you get married again. You could die, which, seeing how the working people lived, was not a totally strange thing to happen. Or you could sell your wife. The habit started sometime near the end of the 1600s, likely born from great need and made stronger by what people believed. Since the law saw women as things you could own, some people thought, why can't that thing be given to someone else like any other? The special way it was done was both shameful and oddly serious, a strange copy of both splitting up and getting married again, all in one event for everyone to see. The selling would usually start with a notice in the town paper. These notices sounded like sales for farm animals. John Smith will sell his wife Mary at Doncaster Market on Tuesday next. She is well, strong, and has a good heart. No good offer will be turned down. Sometimes the notices were more about feelings. Thomas Brown, being sick of his wife, will give her to any person who will take her from his life. She can wash, cook, and milk cows. On the chosen day, the husband would take his wife to a spot where everyone could see, usually a market square where animals were often sold, but sometimes a bar or a public spot was used. The meaning was on purpose and very sad. The wife put on a lead around her neck, arm, or middle, usually made of rope, but now and then of ribbon, in a sad try to have some grace. This lead was not just for show. It showed she was a thing to be passed on, not different from a cow or a sheep. The seller, who was often the husband, would ask for offers. What will I get for this good woman? She's 26 years old, can have babies, is great at sewing, and has all of her teeth. The people would move in closer, men looking at the woman like shoppers at a horse show. They would check her hands for signs of tough work, look at her face to see if she was pretty, and sometimes even ask her to talk, to check how she acted. But this is where the old writings show us a very important thing that makes us see these events in a new way. In many sales, the deal was set up before. The person buying was often the woman's new love, and the sale was really a kind of agreed-upon split and new marriage, done together in one public event. The shame was real, but it was for a reason. It made the breakup seen by everyone, and in the minds of the people there, lawful and true. Think about the story noted in Brighton in 1826, one of the true events that gave Thomas Hardy the idea for his known book, The Mayor of Casterbridge. A man took his clean-looking woman to market and sold her for £5 to a man from the sea. The newspaper said that she did not seem sad to leave and that the deal was done with everyone looking quite happy. The seaman had likely been seeing her for months, and all 3 people saw the sale as their only way to lawfully end one tie and start a new one. In Wenlock Market in 1830, a wife sold for 2 shillings and 6 was sure that the deal should go on, even when her husband felt unsure at the end. She turned to the good man's face and said, "Let me be, you bad man. I will be sold. I want a change." Her voice comes to us through the years, strong, brave, taking what little power the law gave her. The amounts paid were very different, from a high of £100, plus £25 for each child, in today's money over £18,000, to as little as a cup of beer. Most sales were between 2 shillings and 6 pence to 5 shillings, about the same as 20 to 50 pounds today. But the cash was not really the main thing. What was important was the public way the deal was done, seen by dozens or sometimes hundreds of people, who could later say that the woman had been lawfully passed from one man to another. The lead itself had a deep and special meaning. After the sale was all done, it was given to the new husband as a sign that the deal was over. This was not just a play. It was a big try to make something lawful where no law was. The people in it needed to trust, and to make their town trust, that what they were doing was right. Sometimes the event became more grand. Papers of sale were made and signed, with words taken from real papers for selling land. I, John Parsons, for and in the thought of the sum of 6 pounds and 6 shillings, in hand paid, do sell, give, and hand over unto John Tucker, Ann Parsons, wife of the said John Parsons, with all right, ownership, claim, work, and requests at all, for the whole time of the natural life of her, the said Ann Parsons. The event often finished with everyone going to the closest pub for a wedding meal, paid for by the new husband. Church bells might even ring, as they did in one noted event from 1827. The town, hungry for fun and drama, saw these events as big public shows. Crowds of hundreds might come, seeing the sale as a mix of a play, a court case, and a fun fair. But not every wife's sale was a deal that all agreed to between lovers who wanted to be proper. Some were real sales where women were bid on by men they did not know. In March 1766, a woodworker from Southwark sold his wife in a moment of not caring about their marriage at the beer house. When he became clear-headed and asked her to come back, she said no, and he hanged himself. The great need that led to both the sale and what came after shows the impossible spots these law rules made. In 1824 in Manchester, a wife was sold for 5 shillings, but not liking the man who bought her, she was put up again for 3 shillings and a big cup of beer. The woman's voice was important. She could say no to buyers she did not like. But think of the fear of standing there while strange men bid on you like an animal, knowing that your life from now on rested on which of these men was ready to pay the most. The habit was very common in Yorkshire, where 27 of the 108 noted wife sales from that time happened. In May 1837, a blacksmith named G in Halifax first sold his wife for 1 shilling, then bought her back, then sold her again to a married man for half a crown. When the wife came in and found out what happened, she reacted by hitting her unfaithful partner rather hard, a small fact that tells us she had not agreed to any of these deals. The biggest sales could bring huge crowds. In December 1849, in Goole, when a man named Ashton found his wife had run off with her lover while he was in the hospital, he found them and set up a public sale. The Yorkshire crowd came to watch as the full-figured young woman was sold to her secret love for 5 shillings and 9 pence, after a bit of lively back and forth. Before going with her new partner, she snapped her fingers at her old husband and said, "There, good for nothing, that's more than you would bring." Even little ones were not safe from this business. Wives were sometimes sold with their children as part of the deal, like extra things with the main item. In 1865, a woman and her 2 children sold for £100, plus £25 for each of the children, an amount that was many years of pay for a working man. The buyer was taking on not just a wife but a whole family, with all the money duties that came with it. The government's answer to wife selling was not steady and often mixed up. By law, the habit had no ground in the rules. It was pretty much a plan to cheat, followed by marrying again when the new couples wed, but many town leaders seemed not sure about their power to step in. In 1819, when a town judge tried to stop a sale in Ashbourne, Derby, he was hit with things and chased away by the people. Later, he said he was not sure about the act of selling itself. "I do not think I have a right to stop it, because it is based on a custom kept by the people, of which maybe it would be bad to take away from them by any law for that reason." Some town leaders really told people to do it. Poor law keepers, in charge of caring for the very poor in workhouses, sometimes made husbands sell their wives instead of having the town pay for separated families. In 1814, Henry Cook was made by the Effingham workhouse leaders to sell his wife, rather than have the town care for her and her child. She was brought to Croydon Market and sold for 1 shilling, with the town paying for the trip and a wedding dinner. The special power of the marketplace spot cannot be said enough. Markets were where animals switched owners, where things were bought and sold, where the town came to see deals made. By picking these spots, the people were putting their own life drama into the most public money-making space they could. They were asking that their town see and approve what the law would not let them see. But the meaning went further than just the spot. The lead around the woman's neck made clear what the law only hinted at, that wives were things, not different from animals. Some sales even set prices for women by how much they weighed, just like animals. This was not a story. It was the sensible next step of the law's idea. The habit started to fade in the 1840s as people's feelings changed and getting a divorce became a little bit easier. Newspaper stories became more harsh, calling sales awful and shameful events. The growing middle group of people, more and more bothered by such public shows of what they called working people's wildness, called for legal action. By the 1850s, more sales were done in private, with papers instead of public sales, as people tried to keep the idea of lawfulness while not having public shame. Church and town betterment groups also tried to stop the custom. Salvation Army and other church groups spoke against it, though funnily enough, in 1889, a man from the Salvation Army sold his wife for 1 shilling in Hucknall, Nottinghamshire. Even helpers could not fully get away from the real-life problems that made wife selling look like a good answer to impossible troubles. The last known wife sale in England happened in 1913, when a woman telling her story in a Leeds police court said she had been sold to one of her husband's work friends for £1. By then, the habit was an old thing, kept going more by habit and great need than by any trust in its rightness. But the deeper scariness of wife selling was not the event itself. It was what the event showed about the world that made it needed. These were not wild habits done by rough people. They were the sensible answers of thinking people stuck in a silly system. When the law gives no help for a problem you cannot stand, people make their own help, no matter how ugly. The women who stood in those town squares with leads around their necks were not just hurt by their husband's meanness. They were hurt by a set of laws that would not see them as human. They were caught between the law's story that they did not exist and the real fact that they had to find ways to keep going, to get away from harm, to look for joy. Some found that escape through the shameful play of wife selling. They suffered the shame of being sold like an animal because it gave something the law did not give them, a second try. For a few shillings and the cost of their self-respect, they could, by law, become someone else's thing. And maybe, if they were fortunate, that someone else would see them as a human person, not as something to own. The people that came to see these sales were not just fun-seeking lookers, though fun was for sure a part of it. They were watchers of a town's try to fix problems the law could not or would not handle. They were taking part in a kind of rough fairness, a way of making public what private law kept secret. Arthur Munby saw what he named the fine old custom in a North Yorkshire town in February 1860. An old man sold his much younger wife to a middle-aged buyer for 18 pence. The buyer had thought about making an offer, and at last chose that the act was good and lawful. But the town people did not agree. They burned the two as a fake doll on the green, showing that even in places where wife selling went on, it was debated and not simple in its rightness. The habit went across class groups more than middle-class writers from that time wanted to say. The Duke of Chandos, it is said, bought his second wife from a stable keeper around 1740, paying half a crown for a woman his innkeeper was hitting. The Duke had her taught, married her after her first husband passed away, and from what is said, they lived happily. Her speech on her deathbed to her home staff, telling them her story and taking from it a moving lesson of trust in God's plan, shows that even high-class wife-selling could lead to real love and kindness. These tales make our ideas of what wife-selling meant to the people who did it more complex. Yes, it was shameful and low, and yes, it saw women as things in the most real way you can. But it was also, in its strange way, a kind of being set free. It gave a way out from marriages that might have meant a whole life of sadness or death. The old writings show that many wives took a strong part in setting up their own sales. In Plymouth in 1822, a woman gave the money for her helper to buy her out of her marriage. In many cases, wives said a sale must happen when their husbands felt unsure. They were not quiet victims being traded without their say. They were active people in the only way to split up they could get. This does not make the habit any less scary, but it helps us see why it went on for over 200 years. Wife selling was not just about men getting rid of wives they did not want. It was about families trying to fix impossible problems with the only things they had to use. The bigger picture makes the habit even sadder. This was a time when a working man might make 10 shillings a week, when families lived in one room with no running water, when children as young as 6 worked in big buildings for 12 hours a day. Life was hard, short, and gave few choices. Marriage, which for the rich might give friendship and a better life, was, for the poor, often just another kind of money deal. When that money deal broke, when husbands spent the house money on drinks, when wives could not have babies, when hitting made home life a terror, the poor had no place to go. The church gave good advice but no real help. The law gave punishment but no comfort. Only the rough fairness of town-approved wife-selling gave a way out. The newspaper stories of these sales, written mostly by middle-class writers for middle-class people, often are full of looking down and moral upset. They show the people in th. M as animal-like and low, the crowds as wild and nosy. But between the words, we can see tales of people in great need making impossible choices with as much self-respect as they could find. When we look back at wife selling from our new way of seeing, it is easy to see just the meanness and shame. The picture of a woman with a rope around her neck being sold like an animal hits us as the highest sign of women being pushed down. And it was. But it was also something more. It was a town's try to make fairness where the law gave none. It was desperate people's way of taking power in a system made to give them no choices. It was rough, not perfect, often mean, but it was also the only way for the poor to split up. The habit died out not because the world all at once got smarter about women's rights, but because law-based divorce became a little easier to get, and because changing money situations gave women other ways out. The Married Women's Property Acts of 1870 and 1882 started to break down coverture, letting wives keep their pay and get property. Slowly, very slowly, the law started to see that women were people, not property. But for the women who stood in those town squares in the early 1800s, with leads around their necks and crowds moving close to look at them like animals, those changes were too late. They lived in a world that gave them no lawful self, no right to their own pay, no way out from mean or sad marriages, except through the shameful play of a public sale. Their stories tell us that getting better is not a sure thing, that the lawful rights we now have were won with much work and came at a very big cost. They tell us that when systems do not give fairness, people will make their own kinds of fairness, no matter how perfect or morally hard. As you sit in your easy modern life, with your lawful right to split up, your power to own things, your place as a full person by law, think of the women who bought their freedom for a few shillings and the cost of their self-respect in the town squares of old England. Remember that the rights you have were made on the pain of women who had no choice but to wear leads around their necks and hope that someone, anyone, would treat them more nicely than the law did. The last sounds of those town square sales faded over 100 years ago, but they leave us with hard questions about the systems we have made and the people those systems hurt. They tell us that behind every ugly old habit, there are human tales of staying alive, of great need, and the never-ending hunt for something better, even when that something better comes at a price that is almost too much to bear. The horror of wife selling becomes even more real when we look at the exact ways these sales happened. Think of yourself back in that town square, but this time as a watcher in the crowd. The morning fog has not yet gone from the bumpy stones, and the air has the known smell of an animal market, hay, animal dirt, and the iron-like taste of fear that comes from animals who feel their end. But today, the fear is from a totally different place. The woman standing on the little stage is not a cow or a sheep. She is someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's sister. Her name might be Elizabeth or Sarah or Mary, names gone from history except in old papers and court notes. She is 28 years old, let's say, with work-roughened hands and a face that could have been nice once before having no money and a hard life cut lines around her eyes. The lead around her neck is not for looks. It's thick rope, the type used to guide horses, and it rubs on her skin with every little move. Her husband, soon to be her old husband, holds the other end with the easy hold of a man who has done this, though his hands tremble a little from the morning beer meant to calm him down. "Come on now, gentlemen," he yells, his voice going across the square with a practiced power. "What will you give for this good piece of woman flesh? She's strong as an ox, can work 16 hours and not complain, and she has all her teeth." He makes her mouth open with his hard fingers, showing her teeth to the crowd like a horse seller showing off his goods. The men who have come press in, their breaths able to be seen in the cold air, their eyes thinking. They are not bad men. They are farmers, workers, sellers, who know their worth and what is useful. They look at her hands for hard spots that show she can work. They look at her hips to see if she can have babies. They study her face to see if she is pretty enough to warm their beds on cold nights. One man, a blacksmith from the look of his dirty apron, steps up and squeezes her arm to check the hardness of her flesh. She's a bit skinny, he notes, like a doctor, might not make it through a hard winter. What is her nature like? Does she get upset or sad? Sweet as a lamb when she's treated well, the husband answers fast. Never talks loud, does just what she's told. Gee. Ood with kids too, raised 3 of her own without losing one to sickness. But we can see a thing in the woman's eyes that says this is not true. There is a toughness there, a smart mind that shows she is not at all the quiet thing being shown. Her lips are pushed together in a small line, and her hands, though tied, show white knuckles from tight fists. She is not the quiet victim this event shows. She's a player, acting a part in a show that might be her only way to be free. The offer starts slowly. 2 shillings, calls out a man who deals in cows, more to see what will happen than from real want. The amount gets laughs from the people, hardly enough to buy a good dinner. 2 and 6, counts a young farmer, his face red with joy or shame. He is maybe 25, with the clumsy way of a man who has never been married and thinks this is a chance to get a full house all at once. The woman's eyes look at him, sizing him up fast. Is he mean? Does he drink? Will he hit her on Saturday nights when the beer makes him bad? In these few seconds, she is making choices that will set the path for her whole life. 3 shillings. The voice is from the back of the people, from a man she knows. Thomas Miller, a man whose wife died, who has been seeing her in secret for months. Help washes over her face so fast that a few watchers see and poke each other, knowing. This is not a random sale. It's a play, a show made to give lawful rightness to a deal that is already set. But the young farmer does not see the plan. 4 shillings, he calls out, very keen, truly thinking he is fighting for a wife. And I'll add a pig. Now the woman looks really scared. This is not in the plan. Thomas Miller frowns and moves forward. 5 shillings, he says with strength, his voice holding a warning that the younger man does not seem to hear at all. 6, the farmer answers right away, caught in the spirit of winning. The crowd whispers with thanks. This is better fun than they had thought. The woman tries to get her husband's eye, to tell him that something has gone wrong, but he's counting money in his mind, thinking how much beer and gin 6 shillings will get. For the very first time, real fear shows on her face. She could end up with a stranger, someone who might be meaner than the husband she is trying to leave. 7 shillings, Thomas Miller says through tight teeth. It is more money than he has, but he can see the woman's worry. The young farmer stops, patting his pockets. 7 shillings plus a pig is a big buy. He looks at the woman again, really seeing her face for the first time, and something in her look at last gets through his dreamlike ideas. She is not looking at him with thanks or even quiet acceptance. She is looking at him with the kind of fear saved for mad dogs. 7 shillings and 6pence, he says, but his voice has no sureness now. The seller, the husband, feels the change in the air. He is drunk enough to want more, but not drunk enough to miss the risky feeling building in the crowd. Wife selling works on town acceptance, and crowds can get mean when they feel something is not right. Going once for 7 and 6, he calls out, fast, wishing to end the sale before it gets out of hand. 8 shillings, Thomas Miller says, with great need, though everyone can see he does not have that much money. The moment feels very long, like a held breath. The woman stands still between her pain now and a future she does not know, while 2 men bid for the power to own her as fully as they might own a horse or a table. The crowd watches with the interest of people seeing something that is at the same time fun and very upsetting. Then something happens that no one expects. The woman talks. I choose Thomas Miller, she says clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent square. I will go with him by choice, but I will not be sold to no stranger like a bag of seeds. The crowd bursts into whispers and talks. This is not how wife selling is meant to go. The woman does not get to pick. That is the whole idea of the sale way. But there is something in her voice, a self-respect that gets praise, even in this low spot, that makes a few men nod, agreeing. The lady has said, calls out an old man from the side of the crowd. Let her go to who she wants. This is not a cow market. But I bid the most, the young farmer objects, though he sounds more happy than sad. The husband looks around, nervous. He has lost power over his own sale, and the crowd's feeling is changing in ways he does not get. Wife selling works because the town accepts it as right, but being right rests on following some unsaid rules. One of those rules, it seems, is that the woman's wishes matter. 7 shillings from Thomas Miller, he says fast, cutting his losses, and she goes by choice, so there is no fighting with the deal. Thomas Miller steps up with money he has gotten from 3 different neighbors, his face red with relief and sh. Aim, the lead is formally passed from husband to new owner, though Thomas at once takes it off the woman's neck and drops it to the side with clear dislike. The crowd claps as if they have just seen a good ending to a big show, which in many ways they have. The woman, let's call her Sarah, bows to the crowd with more self-respect than anyone there should get. then takes Thomas Miller's held-out arm. But as the crowd starts to leave, we can see the real price of this happy end. Sarah may have gotten out of one bad spot, but she is now, by law, tied to Thomas Miller as fully as she was to her first husband. If Thomas turns out to be mean or becomes a drunk, she will have no more help than she had before. She has just switched one kind of lawful slavery for another, wishing that her new master will be nicer than her old one. The young farmer who almost bought her watches them go with mixed feelings. Part of him is sad. He had been lonely enough to think buying a wife was a good answer to his problems. But part of him is also bothered by what he has just seen. He had never really thought about what it would mean to own another human, to have someone tied to him not by love or even shared good, but by a law story that made her into a thing. The husband, Sarah's old husband, puts his 7 shillings in his pocket and goes to the nearest bar, already thinking how many drinks he can buy. He feels a blend of relief and sadness that he does not fully get. Sarah had been a weight, for sure, another mouth to feed, another person asking for things from his small store, but she had also been the only one in the world who cared if he lived or died, even if that caring was mixed with fear and bad feelings. This one event is made up, but it is made from dozens of noted cases that have very much the same shape. The real truth of wife selling was both more complex and more sad than the easy story of men getting rid of wives they did not want. Think of the case of Mary Ann Price, sold in Merthyr Tydfil in 1837. The newspaper story calls her a young woman of nice looks, who was taken into the market with a new rope around her waist. She was sold to a man named Lewis for 4 shillings and 6 pence, but the deal was clearly set up before. Lewis was called her sweetheart, and the sale was done with the clear happiness of all people. But hidden in the newspaper story are small things that show a deeper tale. Mary Ann's husband was called a collier, a coal worker, who had been much given to drink. The sale happened in a time of bad money trouble in the Welsh mining areas, when families were finding it hard to live on less pay and not steady work. Mary Ann's choice to be sold was likely the choice between starving with a drunken husband and living with a man who could give her food. Or think of the more upsetting case from Carlisle in 1832, where a woman was put up for sale by her husband, but said no to all of the men who offered. The crowd got mean when she kept saying no to possible buyers, and the spot got so tight that the town judge stepped in to stop a fight. The woman was in the end sold to a man she had never seen for 3 shillings, but she said no to going with him. The sale was called no good, and she was let go back to her husband, though what happened to her after is not written down. These cases show the main clash at the center of wife selling. The habit rested on the law's story that women were things that could be passed on by choice, but it also rested on the woman's agreement for town acceptance. A wife who was clearly being sold when she did not want to be brought kindness, and sometimes help from crowds who might otherwise like the show. The places where wife selling happened tell us something important about the town and money situations that made it seem needed. Yorkshire, with its factory towns and country poorness, had the highest number of noted cases. The habit was less seen in the rich South and almost not known in Scotland, where different law ways gave other choices for unhappy couples. In the factory North, where old town ways were falling apart under the push of fast money change, wife selling gave way to fit old habits to new times. Factory work meant that families were no longer money groups working together on farms. Husbands and wives might work in different jobs, have different time plans, and make their own friend groups. When marriages broke under these strains, old helps like town help or family push were less there. The meaning of the lead shows the deep links between wife selling and animal trading, but it also had a useful lawful reason. English common law knew many ways of passing things, and the real touching of goods, called livery of season, was one of the oldest and most honored ways. By using a lead and doing the sale in a marketplace, people were calling on law ways that went back to old times. The lead also had a mind-based reason for both sellers and buyers. For husbands, it made clear what the law already said, that their wives were things to be gotten rid of by choice. For buyers, it showed their new rights and duties. For the women, the moment when the lead was taken off often was their mind's change from one house to another. Some of the biggest wife sales had many passes of the same woman. In Sheffield in 1842, a woman was sold 3 times in one day, as different men bid for her and then changed their minds. Each time, she had to suffer the shame of being looked at by possible buyers, only to find herself back on the sale block when the deal fell apart. The newspaper story says she became more and more upset as the day went on, at last crying hard when the 3rd sale was also stopped. These many sales show the deep weakness of the whole system. Because wife selling had no law base, there was no way to make the deals stick or fix fights. A buyer who changed his mind could just give back his buy and ask for his money back. A woman who found her new spot unbearable had no help except to get her new husband to sell her again. The children of sold wives held a very sad spot in these deals. Sometimes they were part of the sale price, like extras to the main buy. A woman sold in Pontefract in 1847 came with 3 children, and the buyer said he would take care of their growing up and learning. But more often, children were left with their fathers, apart from their mothers by deals they were too young to get. The feeling-based effect on these children does not show up in most old writings, but we can think of the pain of seeing your mother taken away with a rope around her neck by a stranger who had just bought her. Some children never saw their mothers again. Others were joined again years later in ways that must have been clumsy and sad for everyone there. The habit of wife selling also had deep effects on the towns where it happened. These sales were public events that brought crowds of hundreds, sometimes thousands of watchers. They became kinds of popular fun, but they also were town talks about marriage, right and wrong, and the lines of okay ways. The crowds that came for wife sales were not quiet lookers. They were active people in a kind of rough fairness. They could like or dislike certain sales, step in when they felt a woman was being treated badly, and use their shared voice to make town rules stick. A husband who tried to sell his wife to someone the town thought was not right might find his sale broken up by angry watchers. These town helps show that wife selling was not just a thing of one person's choice or great need. It was set in complex town links and moral money ways. The habit could only work when it had town help, and that help was based on following some unsaid rules about fairness, agreement, and being respectable. The falling town rank of wife selling in the middle of the 1800s showed bigger changes in British life. The growing middle class, with its focus on home privacy and moral goodness, was more and more bothered with public shows of working-class marriage breakups. Newspapers started calling wife sales awful shows and brutal scenes, words that showed the class worries of a time when factory money-making was making sharp lines between good and bad ways. Church revival groups also had a part in stopping the habit. Evangelical Christianity, with its focus on the specialness of marriage and the moral fixing of the working classes, saw wife selling as a sign of soul sickness that had to be gotten rid of. Methodist and Baptist speakers often spoke against the habit from their church stands, though their good luck in changing ways was small. The law system's answer to wife selling grew slowly and not always the same. Before 1850, legal action was not common, and punishments were light, usually a few days in jail or a small money fine. But as people's feelings got harder against the habit, courts started giving tougher punishments. By the 1860s, men found guilty of selling their wives could get 6 months in jail, and buyers could be charged with a plan to cheat. But showing that a wife sale had really happened was often hard. The people in it had strong reasons to say no money had been given, or to say that the event was just a joke or a play. Juries, often made of working-class people where wife selling was still known, if not liked, were sometimes not keen to find guilty people for what they saw as tries to fix impossible problems. The start of music hall fun in the middle of the 1800s gave wife selling a new life in culture, even as the habit itself faded. Popular songs like "The Sale of a Wife" turned the event into a joke, showing the husband as a silly man, the wife as a nag, and the buyer as a fool. These songs cleaned up the real great need and shame of wife selling by making it into safe fun for middle-class watchers. But the staying power of wife selling in popular culture shows something important about its mind-based and town-funkty. The habit dealt with deep worries about marriage, things, and gender links that did not go away when the event itself became not okay in town. Music hall songs, cheap books, and later movies kept on looking at themes of marriage breakdown and fixing that wife selling had once dealt with straight on. The worldwide side of wife selling also needs a look. English people who settled brought the habit to American lands, where it went on into the 1800s. Old court writings note cases from Connecticut to South Carolina, showing that the custom could fit different town and money situations. In some American places, wife selling seems to have been even more money-based than in England, with proper bills of sale and newspaper notices. The French were very taken by English wife selling, seeing it as a sign of British wildness and moral sickness. French newspapers often told of English wife sales, often making the details bigger for a dramatic feel. Political drawings showed John Bull leading his wife to market like a cow, using the habit as a sign of English meanness and money love. This worldwide notice was very shameful to English top people who were trying to make Britain the leader of European culture and moral goodness. The idea that Englishmen often sold their wives like animals went against the new Victorian idea of home goodness and female purity. Government leaders started pushing town judges to crack down on the habit more strongly. The part of alcohol in wife selling cannot be missed. Many sales started in bars, pushed by drink and man friendship that made the shaming of women seem okay or even funny. The event often ended with all people drinking together to mark the deal, a habit that helped make normal what might otherwise seem shocking or mean. But alcohol also gave a handy reason for men who later felt bad about their acts. A few noted cases have husbands who sold their wives while drunk and then tried to get them back when clear-headed. The law system mostly said no to these after-sale regrets, seeing wife selling as a real deal no matter the seller's mind state. The money sides of wife selling become clearer when we look at it with other kinds of working-class survival ways. In towns where no work was common and pay was hardly enough to live, marriage was often a money need, not a love choice. Women needed male safety and help. Men needed housework and child raising. When these money partnerships broke, wife selling gave a way to move around money and duties. The prices paid for wives showed these money thoughts. Women who were called good workers, good at valued skills like spinning or brewing, got higher prices than those whose work was worth less. Age, health, and baby-having power all changed the market price. The back and forth that went with these sales shows that people in them knew just what they were buying and selling. Not just a woman, but her work, her baby-making, and her house skills. The papers that are left from wife sales often have telling details about working-class life and what they valued. Newspaper stories tell of women's clothes, their body looks, their skills and tempers. They write down the words said during sales, keeping bits of working-class talk and feelings that are not often in other old writings. These papers also show the fancy rules that went with wife selling. There were right ways to do a sale, good places and times, okay kinds of payment. Breaking these habits could lead to town dislike or even fights. The habit may have been low, but it was not messy. It followed rules that people knew and mostly honored. The fading of wife selling after 1850 was not just the result of law push or town dislike. Money changes were making the habit less needed and less useful. Factory jobs gave women some money freedom, making them less fully dependent on male help. The growth of cities gave more chances to get away from bad marriages by just leaving. The spread of the train system made it easier to vanish and start new lives in far-off places. Changing feelings toward marriage also had a part. The love-based idea that was moving through all levels of the world stressed love and shared feeling as the right base for marriage, making the money parts of wife selling seem more and more gross. The new women's rights movement, though still small and mostly middle class, gave other ways for thinking about gender links and female freedom. The last noted wife sales in England happened in the early 1900s, by which time they were widely seen as old things from a wild past. The 1913 case in Leeds had a woman who said her husband had sold her to a work friend for £1, but the facts were not clear, and the town's answer was all bad. There was no crowd of watchers, no public event, no feeling that this was an okay way to fix marriage problems. By then, lawful divorce was there for the working classes, though still costly and a town shame. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1923 would so on make divorce easier for women, giving lawful help for some of the problems that wife selling had once fixed. Town help programs, though small, gave other choices to the hard choices that had once made wife selling seem okay. The story of wife selling goes far past its historical time. The habit shows basic strains about gender, things, and personal freedom that still shape today's talks about marriage and divorce. It shows how law systems can fail to meet human needs, making people make their own answers that may be morally hard but practically needed. Modern readers might want to see wife selling as a sign of old wildness, proof that we have moved past such rough forms of gender pushing down. But the habit was the result of certain law and money situations that made impossible choices for people in great need. The women who took part in wife sales were not quiet victims. They were active people trying to make their lives better with the few things they could use. The basic question brought up by wife selling is still important today. What happens when law systems fail to give good help for situations you cannot stand? Today's examples might be undocumented people who cannot get law help, or abused people who cannot pay for a lawyer, or families broken by money rules that put abstract ideas over human well-being. The crowds that came to watch wife sales were not just looking for fun. They were taking part in town talks about fairness, right and wrong, and the lines of okay ways. In our more private world, we have lost some of the ways that let towns step into single-person sad stories, but we have not gotten rid of the sad stories themselves. As we end this look at one of history's most upsetting customs, we go back to that town square where our tale started. The woman with the lead around her neck, standing on the stage while strangers bid for the right to own her, stands for thousands of women who faced impossible choices in a system made to give them no power. Some found joy in their new deals, real love with partners who saw them as human beings, not as things. Others found that changing masters did not change the basic nature of their being owned. All of them paid a price in self-respect, and pride that no amount of practical good could fully make up for. Their stories tell us that getting better is not a sure thing, that the rights and safeties we have were built on the pain of people who had no choice, but to work in systems that said no to their humanity. They tell us that behind every old habit, no matter how bad it seems to modern eyes, are human beings trying to stay alive, to find love, to make meaning in situations that offer few good choices. The leads are gone now. The town squares have been made into shopping malls. The lost systems that once saw women as things have been fixed. But the deeper questions are still here. How do we make systems that help human needs, not abstract ideas? How do we make sure that getting better reaches everyone, not just the lucky few? How do we build worlds where nobody has to pick between self-respect and staying alive? The women of old England who wore leads around their necks and wished for kinder masters deserve better than to be known simply as victims of old wildness. They deserve to be known as human beings who faced impossible situations with whatever bravery and power they could find, who found ways to live and sometimes even do well in a world made to crush them. Their voices sound across the years, telling us that freedom is not free, that self-respect is not sure, and that the price of fairness is always watching against the systems and situations that turn human beings into things. In remembering their stories, we honor not just their memory, but our duty to make sure that such choices never again become needed. The town squares are empty now, but the questions they brought up about human worth, law-based fairness, and the price of survival are still as important today as they were 200 years ago. In that importance lies both a warning and a hope, a warning that getting better can be turned back, and a hope that knowing the past can help us build a more fair future.